Hello and welcome to the latest DCD Talks. My name is Zoe Turner and I am a digital portfolio manager for DCD. And today we are going to be talking about keeping up with the copper demand. And I'm so incredibly pleased to have TXO's head of asset recovery and services, David Evans, joining us. David, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks for the invite.
So before we kick off, can you tell us a little bit more about your career journey so far and your current role with TXO?
Absolutely. So my background, my professional background probably starts in a rugby capacity, which is not necessarily applicable. But from a networks perspective, most of my career has actually been around the operator journey and helping operators to generate revenues and actually manage the life cycle of their assets, whether that's extending the life of their networks or actually monetizing the redundant assets and making space for new assets. And the sustainability journey and the green metrics around that in terms of what's their carbon emission savings, what is the impact from an environmental perspective has probably in the last 12 years taken quite a turn. 12 years ago, it wasn't important. As of the last probably 2 or 3 years, it's been number one on any RFP from any tier one operator. So yeah, the journey has been quite vast, but very close to the tier one telecom operator. That's predominantly what my career has been built on here at TXO.
I think it's an interesting start, from rugby to telecoms. I'm sure there's some parallels there. But that's wonderful to hear. Well, David, obviously there's a lot to talk about copper. It is kind of this fundamental part of our digital infrastructure as we see it today. But we're coming off the back of, for instance, the S&P report from earlier this month, talking about the AR network build out and how that's going to impact copper. Can you give us a bit of an insight into how the AI infrastructure build out is going to impact just the scale and the urgency of copper demand?
Absolutely. So from my perspective, my role covers our global locations, which are in Brazil, North America, Australia, Sweden, UK, and France. And we are seeing a constant mirroring of issues globally. The AI drive is giving us a power surge. This theory that copper is now a redundant commodity that will be recycled and melted down into to power the EV networks. Yes, that is one use of copper, but we are seeing the grid upgrade required to run AI models is a huge demand. So the risk that we've got, and I have read quite a lot of Accenture's work, and it's not just Accenture that's seeing this, is that AI itself is not the constraint, the actual infrastructure is. So the copper that we recover from telecom networks is required to power the AI networks. And that is quite quickly ramping up, as you can see. And the last thing AI wants is to be limited by the infrastructure. So that demand for copper is giving us a problem. What it's doing is driving the price of copper up based on supply and demand, but it's also giving us a mining issue. So it is we can't build to build a new mine. You're looking at 10 to 15 years to develop. Whereas we're sitting on what is referred to as a legacy estate from a PSTN perspective of copper that is widely redundant, maybe, depending on how you look at it. Still very valuable in the UK itself. You're still seeing that. You're still seeing the healthcare services and the elderly care or the dependent care buttons, the red buttons reliant on this. We're still using the bank shutters and the bank vaults and the alarm gates. These are all wired and connected to a copper network that is not penetrable. It's power-based, not internet-based. How you're looking at it from a security perspective. These copper networks still serve a purpose, but their purpose could be on a much bigger scale if you look at it from an AI. And actually what we need that copper for is to continue the digital age. So yeah, the demand is probably going to create a big problem from speeding up PSTN exit, mining, huge problem. And then last but not least will be the demand for making sure that we can keep up. And we're not keeping up right now. And keeping up comes at a cost. And that final point will drive the price of copper through the roof, as it is, and you're seeing it in quite a lot of media noise. That price is rising. I think we're at about $14,000 a ton currently.
David, I think you've made some incredibly important points, and I want to focus on one of them in particular, which is this power delivery issue, which affects all of us. It is one of the biggest things that we're talking about in the industry. But to what extent would you say, for copper in particular, power delivery is a bigger constraint than data transport alone?
I would say very, very much an issue. So in many cases, power is now the dominant constraint. So think about the network operators globally have spent decades optimizing data transport, moving to fiber from copper, actively going wireless. Much more has been done in terms of the speed of mobile. Compressing their technologies has been rapidly advanced, and that's all very positive. Power, space, and cooling used to be a huge issue, and that didn't keep pace. I would say space and cooling didn't, and now power is actually our biggest issue. So there's a really good phrase that I heard recently, and it's that the WAN is becoming the new LAN. And what that basically means in simple terms is the national networks now need to deliver the same performance, but that's not expected in the same building. That is now the networks themselves. And that's challenging in the UK. And if you think about the size of the UK, that's not as large if you compare it to the US market. You can probably fit the UK and the US 40 times. In Texas, you could probably fit the UK 3 times. So from a power availability perspective, the legacy estate becomes a strategic asset. So you can actually think about it. If you're looking at WAN being the new LAN, you're going to need the same power capabilities everywhere and not centrally. So fiber capacity is scaled. The power grids have not. And that's becoming a real big issue. And it's not about failing as operators. But if you think about the speed of which these, I say, AI networks have evolved, then it's just keeping up with that. And this copper issue is a huge one. And it's doing two things. It's driving the speed of which the PSTN networks can be depowered, but it's actually is also rising, or is improving or increasing the price of copper. Improving, I said that from a commercial perspective, from a TXO perspective, is always a good thing. It makes the commodity higher value, and it makes it much more commercially feasible to extract it from the ground or aerial or in ducts preferably. But actually what it is doing is driving that price up, and it's slowing down build. So yeah, it is creating an issue.
WAN is the new LAN. I think there's a t-shirt or a cap waiting to happen on that.
The WAN is becoming the new LAN, but the estate was not built for it, nor is the power built.
Beautifully described there. I think that's kind of the perfect summation of the issue. There's another point you touched on, which is this mining issue, and not to unintentional pun really, but can you dig a little bit deeper onto urban mining, for instance, as a possible solution for meeting that copper demand?
So urban mining, it is a lot of the finances of the world will have moved their focus from the mines to the urban mine. It's a little bit like low-hanging fruit. I mentioned it earlier about a mine taking 10 to 15 years to build. It is a lot quicker to go and, you could probably use an analogy of where you're not actually checking your own cupboards. What have you actually already got that's dug or mined? We've got the opportunity to avoid a decade-long mine development. But what it's not going to do is replace long-term mining. So it's just buying us time. I think we can look at it from that perspective. We can probably look at the network, I'd say telecom network estate globally, and measure its value in months, or its yield in months and not in decades. So that fixes our short-term demand. And I do think that once we've established our power infrastructure for the speed of which it's grown, we might be able to take a bit of pressure off that mining industry, but it's not going to replace it. And urban mining is supply chain resilience, I would say. I think that's a good way of looking at it. And the copper cities that we're looking for are already here. They're just on older networks and not necessarily being utilized for what we would refer to as a fiber or AI network. And it's purely a power infrastructure, but it's right beneath our feet.
That absolutely makes sense. Kind of using the, as you say, that low hanging fruit, the stuff that may be readily available instead of looking for it elsewhere. That's a very good point to make. Um, there's a question that kind of comes to mind with all of this. When we're thinking power or mining, just for the sake of copper, what regulatory factors kind of most limit the ability to kind of retire the existing copper networks that we have?
So there's lots of limitations. One is it's being used. That it's already a network on what we would refer to as PSTN networks. But I think the biggest factor is social responsibility, and it's being able to reach people. It's being able to press a red button and receive care. The dependent care customers or red button alarm services, lift phones, say emergency access, the 999 network, for example, that all sits on a critical infrastructure that we're trying to expedite the exit. It serves an existing purpose, and it's probably from I mentioned the social responsibility perspective. That's not technological speak. That's people genuinely depend on this. It's not people stuck in their ways or people don't want to go to fiber. It's not. They are genuinely dependent on this. So companies like BT or VM or AT&T have to look after their customers, and moving them onto the newer networks that necessarily support the technology that they rely on isn't a good move. So, and then when you start looking at the cost of life versus the returns of copper, that doesn't ring true for any operator. Nobody wants to do that. But downtime on those networks, that isn't an option. And as the compaction of these networks happens, it will create outages. It has in the UK alone. We've seen a delay in PSTN shutdown because of these issues. There were some cases a few years ago where there was huge fines given out to the operators in the UK for that because there were a few lives lost. Then all of a sudden, money's not relevant, and it's not nice. But legacy doesn't always mean insecure. I think there's a secure aspect that Ofcom are driving, that all of these networks must be built in a secure fashion in line with TSA. But what they're not actually understanding is that our existing infrastructure is functional, it is non-penetrable, it is not connected to the internet, and it serves a purpose. And I think that's really quite misunderstood. But it is causing two issues, and the operators, I do feel for the operators, they are stuck between a rock and a hard place. You must upgrade to the newest security, which means you must upgrade your network to the latest and greatest fiber platforms, but you also must maintain and ensure that there is a national infrastructure that is functional and be socially responsible. I mean, you can't win, but I do feel for the operator in that case. But either way, from a TXO perspective, we are there to help operators exit. We are there to help them monetize those networks, but we're also there to help them maintain it. So it's a lose-lose for the operator, but unfortunately for them, it's almost a win-win from our perspective because we'll support them either way.
That's wonderful. And I think, as you say, it's a delicate balance of managing the infrastructure we have currently and the resources we have currently, such as copper, and what we're looking for in the future, like hollow core fiber or just the fiber build out for AI. Well, David, this has been amazing. And unfortunately, we are quickly running out of time. But I would like to ask, looking at the future of this discussion, looking at the future of copper in our digital infrastructure, what advice would you give our audience? What decisions do you think are being made today and how that's going to impact the way we use copper in the future? What do you think, our audience should really take away from this discussion?
My takeaway would be releasing the revenue in the legacy networks to fund and open the door for the newer networks is a much better way of looking at it from a perspective of scrap. these networks are not scrap. And actually, the speed at which you exit does impact how you look after your customer. And the speed at which you exit will expedite the revenue back in. And if you can use that revenue to fund the OPEX, you will make space for the next generation of that network. So speed is one thing. Being compliant with that speed is another. And it's just about making sure that you maintain that network, avoid downtime, and maximize revenue returns in a controlled manner. That would be the key takeaway for any operator in this discussion, and having suitable alternative technology should things fail. And that, I think the US is leading that market. And I think we've got quite a lot of experience in that market to share with the rest of the world. So yeah, it's an interesting journey, but making way for the future and making sure that infrastructure is not the problem.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, David, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today. And we sincerely hope that we have you again on soon to see how all this pans out.
Very good. Thank you very much, Zoe.
And to our audience who are watching at home, at work, or on your commute, thank you as well for joining us. Don't hesitate to join us again next week for the next DCD Talks. Don't hesitate to reach out as well to DCD or to TXO for any questions. I'm sure we'd be happy to chat. Till then, see you soon.